Just 5 minutes ago, the heavy oak doors of the king's private study at Sandringham didn't just close, they sealed a chapter of history that the world was never supposed to read. King Charles III, a man who has spent 7 decades preparing for the weight of the crown, has finally broken the ultimate royal taboo. He has bypassed the gray-suited advisors, ignored the frantic pleas of the palace's communication machine, and spoken the shrill, unvarnished truth about the monarchy's final succession plan. This isn't a routine update on royal duties or a polished broadcast meant to soothe the masses. This is a survival broadcast. For the first time, the king has admitted that the institution he inherited is not just fragile, it is currently undergoing a radical, desperate restructuring that changes the fate of Prince William and Prince George forever. The timing of this revelation has sent a localized earthquake through the halls of Buckingham Palace. 5 minutes. That was the window between total institutional secrecy and a reality that now feels irreversible. Charles did not allow a spokesperson to soften the blow. He did not issue a vague, written statement from a faceless courtier. He chose to speak himself, and in doing so, he has effectively dismantled the carefully curated illusion of a business-as-usual monarchy. Witnesses describe the king's voice as hollow, stripped of its usual ceremonial distance, carrying a frequency of urgency that suggests the clock is ticking much faster than any royal watcher anticipated. This was not the speech of a monarch in total control. It was the confession of a father and a sovereign who has looked into the abyss of his family's future and realized that the old rules no longer apply. Why now? And why this tone of startling honesty? For months, the palace has tried to control the narrative of continuity, leaning heavily on the stoic image of Prince William and the quiet recovery of Princess Catherine. But beneath that polished surface, the shrill truth was beginning to rot the foundation. The monarchy has long been more afraid of the truth than of scandal, but tonight, Charles decided that the truth was the only thing that could save it. He spoke in the first person, acknowledging a level of pain and institutional difficulty that suggests the succession plan we all thought we knew. The one of a slow, predictable transition has been torn up. Subtextual clues in his delivery indicate that the health crises within the senior ranks have forced his hand. He admitted that the crown can no longer afford the luxury of silence. Silence, he hinted, is what nearly cost them everything. As the king's words began to ripple through the global news cycle, the reaction within the firm was reportedly one of quiet, cold devastation. Senior aides, some of whom have served the institution for decades, were seen in tears, fully aware that the mask had finally dropped. The carefully balanced image of strength and untouchable dignity has been replaced by a raw, human vulnerability. When a king chooses to speak about the end of his own era and the radical reshaping of his heir's destiny in this manner, it signals more than just concern. It signals that the gears of the monarchy are grinding against the reality of human mortality. The fairy tale is officially over. What Charles has just unveiled is a blueprint for a monarchy that is forced to admit it can bleed, and a succession plan that looks less like a coronation and more like a tactical retreat. The king's announcement tonight did not happen in a vacuum. It was the explosive climax to months of calculated, suffocating silence. For nearly half a year, the palace machine attempted to manage the optics by shielding the monarchy behind a fortress of privacy. We were told to look at the smiles and the carefully staged photos, but behind those gates, the gears of the crown were grinding to a halt. You don't keep canceling a future king's schedule or keeping a princess entirely out of view for months by accident. This wasn't just about respecting a family's boundaries. It was about an institution more afraid of the truth than of the scandal that truth would eventually ignite. As the months dragged on, the silence morphed from a shield into a weapon, one that began to hurt the very people it was supposed to protect. In a private family, silence is personal. In a public institution funded by the people, silence is a crisis of trust. The palace didn't just manage the perception, they tried to control reality itself, and that's where the structural cracks began to show. Like an ancient house with a cracked foundation, you can only hang so many beautiful paintings before the walls start to buckle under the pressure. Charles, standing in that quiet study tonight, finally admitted what the public has sensed for months. The fairy tale monarchy is bleeding, and the cost of hiding that truth has been far higher than anyone imagined. Silence in a family is one thing. Silence in a public institution is another. This wasn't transparency, it was the truth dragged out at the last possible moment. The shrill truth is that the monarchy has reached its breaking point. The succession plan is being rewritten now because the old one relied on the illusion of immortality. But the institution is now forced to admit it is mortal. Every missed handshake, every hollow smile at a garden party, and every cancelled investiture was a breadcrumb leading to this confession. The palace's insistence on privacy was actually a delay tactic for a reality they weren't prepared to face, a future where the crown's most vital players might not be able to fulfill the roles history has carved out for them. The silence wasn't just a strategy, it became a pressure cooker. As days turned into weeks without a single sighting of the princess, the whispers started to infiltrate the very walls they were meant to stay within. This is where the mask began to slip. Internal leaks from the medical facilities suggested that the planned and successful surgery narrative was, at best, a partial truth. Complications weren't just a possibility. They were a reality that the palace's old guard, the Grey Men, desperately tried to bury under layers of protocol. But there was a growing divide. On one side stood the traditionalists, arguing that mystery was the crown's greatest protection. On the other, a furious Prince William. Sources claim that the tension reached a breaking point when an internal email was leaked, reportedly with the subject line, "She deserves more than silence." It wasn't just a memo, it was a battle cry from those who saw Catherine as a human being first and a symbol second. William was reportedly volcanic. He watched helplessly as his wife's dignity was traded for institutional stability. He saw the palace machine prioritizing the firm over the mother of the future king. The fights behind closed doors weren't just about PR, they were about the soul of the monarchy. William allegedly demanded transparency, a move that went against every instinct the courtiers had honed over decades. The leaks grew more devastating. Rumors of misdiagnosis and delayed treatments began to circulate. The atmosphere inside the palace turned from professional to paranoid. Who was talking, and why? The realization started to dawn on them. You cannot manage a human crisis with the cold logic of a corporation. The shrill truth was leaking out, one whisper at a time, proving that the more you hide, the more people look for the cracks. If the monarchy is to survive, it can no longer pretend that nothing ever breaks behind its walls. While the public was busy dissecting grainy photographs and official health updates, a far more clinical and cold-hearted operation was unfolding behind the closed doors of the palace. This is the part of the shrill truth that King Charles has finally had to confront. The realization that while Princess Catherine was fighting for her health, the institution was already preparing for her absence. In a hidden gathering that few courtiers even knew took place, the senior royals met to discuss a reality that Prince William was never supposed to hear about. The summit involved King Charles, Queen Camilla, and a very small, elite circle of senior advisors known for their ruthless loyalty to the firm. Noticeably absent, Prince William, entirely excluded, Princess Catherine. This wasn't a meeting about medical support or family care. It was a strategy session about institutional continuity. The core of the discussion was a chilling proposal. If Catherine's recovery remained progressive or uncertain, the monarchy needed a soft replacement. Not a replacement of her title, but a replacement of her function. They were looking for a royal face to fill the void, someone to shield the crown from the instability of a missing future queen. The shrill truth here is a betrayal of the highest order. The palace wasn't just planning for a rainy day, they were effectively sketching out a monarchy that moved forward without its most popular asset. One courtier reportedly suggested elevating another female royal, someone perceived as stable, polished, and uncontroversial, into a more visible, semi-permanent role. To the traditionalists in that room, it was a logical contingency plan. To a husband watching his wife suffer, it was a treasonous act of erasure. Camilla's role in this summit has been described by insiders as vocal and pragmatic. She reportedly pushed for discretion, arguing that the public could not handle the uncertainty and that the crown must always appear intact and functioning, even if that required a well-rehearsed illusion. Her stance deepened the divide between the old guard, who prioritized the office, and the new guard, who prioritized the human. This secret meeting is the prison of secrecy that William eventually found out about, and it is the reason why the atmosphere within the palace shifted from concern to outright war. The institution wasn't just managing Catherine's illness, they were managing her exit, and that is a secret that, once out, changes the way we look at royal loyalty forever. When Prince William finally discovered that the clandestine meeting, the summit that debated his wife's future, as if she were a mere piece of palace furniture, had taken place without his knowledge, the reaction was described by staff as nothing short of volcanic. For years, William has been the disciplined soldier of the firm, the man who buried his grief and his grievances for the sake of the crown. But tonight, the shrill truth is that the soldier has finally been replaced by a husband and a father who has reached his limit. One palace aide described the moment William confronted his father as the first time they had ever seen the future king lose his composure so completely that the chandeliers in the hallway literally shook as he slammed the heavy doors behind him. This was not a strategic disagreement. It was a visceral reaction to what William viewed as a treasonous betrayal. To him, the fact that his father, Queen Camilla, and the Grey Men were already sketching out a monarchy without Catherine was more than just a contingency plan. It was an admission that the institution had already stopped caring about the woman who had sacrificed everything to save it. William reportedly looked his father in the eye and asked a single haunting question. "Are we doing this again?" It was a direct reference to the way the monarchy treated his mother, Diana, downplaying her pain, dismissing her humanity, and preparing for her replacement while she was still breathing. The argument that followed wasn't about royal duty. It was about the fundamental clash between transparency and restraint. King Charles, bound by the cold traditions of the institution he has spent his life serving, urged restraint and discretion. He feared that any public admission of the severity of Catherine's condition would cause a global panic and weaken the image of the crown. But for William, the secrecy had become a prison. He argued that the public had a right to know the truth, and that by hiding it, the palace was effectively forcing him and his wife to live a lie that was suffocating them both. He refused to let history repeat itself, especially when it came to his children. William's fierce protectiveness of George, Charlotte, and Louis has become the new front line of the royal war. He has reportedly started pulling them back from public engagements and pushing back against the palace's press machine with unprecedented intensity. He is no longer willing to let his children become collateral damage in a system that prioritizes optics over human health. The shrill truth of the final succession plan is that William is now questioning whether the role he was born for is even worth the emotional toll it is taking on his family. For the first time in modern history, the heir to the throne is at war with the monarchy itself, and the battle lines are drawn not in the halls of Parliament, but in the private rooms of the people who love Catherine most. While the men of the family were locked in a cycle of duty and volcanic rage, a quiet but devastating move was being made from within the sanctuary of Catherine's recovery quarters. Before the world knew the extent of her illness, and even before King Charles stepped toward the microphones to deliver his statement, Catherine had already taken her destiny into her own hands. She did not use a press release or a choreographed social media post. Instead, she chose the oldest and most intimate weapon in the royal arsenal, a handwritten, sealed letter addressed directly to King Charles. This letter, which now sits at the very heart of the shrill truth, was not delivered through the usual layers of palace bureaucracy. It arrived quietly, slipped into the king's private quarters by a trusted aide late one evening, and its contents have left the monarchy's leadership stunned into a paralyzing silence. This letter was Catherine's voice, unfiltered, vulnerable, and dangerously deliberate. It was a final attempt to speak not as a future queen or a public symbol, but as a mother, a wife, and a woman who realized she could no longer speak as a royal. Sources close to the situation describe the tone of the letter as devastatingly final. In those carefully chosen sentences, Catherine revealed the true depth of her shrill truth. She spoke openly about her fears, not of the illness itself, but of the monarchy's cold machinery. She expressed a haunting realization that, while she was fighting for her life, the institution was already treating her as a liability to be managed or a role to be filled. The letter contained a direct appeal to Charles, not as her sovereign, but as a father-in-law. She reportedly invoked the name that still haunts every corridor of Buckingham Palace: Diana. Catherine asked Charles to remember the cost of silence, the price of prioritizing the firm over the human heart, and she pleaded with him not to let history repeat itself with her children. She requested a sanctuary of truth, a period where she could focus on recovery without the looming shadow of royal duty or the expectation of a staged return. It wasn't a request for permission. It was a notification of a boundary that she was no longer willing to let the palace cross. When King Charles read that letter, the emotional barriers he had spent decades building reportedly shattered. Those close to him say he read it 3 times in total silence, refusing to call for his advisors or his strategy team. For the first time, he was forced to see the human wreckage caused by the very protocol he was born to uphold. Catherine's honesty reached a part of him that no political briefing could ever touch. He wept not as a king, but as a man who realized that his daughter-in-law didn't trust the institution he led to respond with compassion. This letter changed the succession plan forever, because it proved that the monarchy's greatest asset was no longer willing to be its greatest victim. The shrill truth was now written in ink, and there was no way for the palace to erase the reality of her pain. For King Charles, the shrill truth isn't just about a medical diagnosis or a complicated succession plan. It is about a haunting, suffocating familiarity that has paralyzed his reign from the very beginning. As he sat in the flickering light of his study, reading and rereading Catherine's letter, it wasn't just the future of the monarchy that weighed on him, it was the ghost of a woman who once occupied that same position of vulnerability. The shrill truth is that Charles didn't just stay silent because of protocol. He froze because he was watching history repeat itself in high definition, and he realized, with a soul-crushing sense of guilt, that the firm was using the exact same lethal tactics on Catherine that it once used on Diana. The parallels are impossible to ignore, and for Charles, they are a source of profound internal rot. Decades ago, he watched as a young, popular, and vibrant woman was slowly dismantled by the cold machinery of the palace. Her pain downplayed, her mental health dismissed, and her voice silenced in the name of institutional stability. Tonight, Charles has had to admit that despite his promises to do better, the institution hasn't changed. He saw Catherine, the modern anchor of the monarchy, being pushed into that same dark corner. He saw the Grey Men prioritizing the image of an intact family over the actual survival of the person within it. This realization is why the king remained still for so long. He was trapped between the legacy of kingship and the moral imperative of his own humanity. Inside the palace, the atmosphere of silence was a direct echo of the 1,990 seconds, the briefings that urged caution, the murmurings of aides who warned that transparency would destabilize the crown. These were the same voices that once silenced Diana. Charles had sworn he would never let history repeat itself. Yet here he was, presiding over a palace that was once again treating a suffering woman as a problem to be managed rather than a human to be healed. The shrill truth of his paralysis is that he was terrified. He was terrified that if he spoke the truth, the floodgates of public anger would open, not just for Catherine, but for everything that happened 30 years ago. He feared that by admitting Catherine was broken, he was admitting the monarchy was still the same cold, unfeeling machine that broke Diana. Those close to the king say the guilt became unbearable. He would pace the room late at night, whispering Catherine's name as if saying it aloud would make the burden easier to carry. He saw William's volcanic rage and recognized it. It was the same rage a young William felt years ago, watching his mother suffer in silence. This time, however, Charles realized he couldn't hide behind the throne anymore. The final succession plan he has broken silence on is his desperate attempt to exorcise that ghost. He has finally realized that the only way to save the monarchy is to stop acting like a king and start acting like a man who has finally learned the cost of his own silence. The shrill truth is that the monarchy cannot survive another Diana, and Charles decided tonight that he would rather risk the crown than lose Catherine to the same cold darkness. Just when the world thought they had reached the bottom of this tragedy, the shrill truth took its most devastating turn. Another confidential medical report, leaked from a high-level liaison close to the royal household, has shattered the remaining illusions of a simple recovery. The news is no longer about surgery or exhaustion. It is about a reality that is classified in the coldest clinical terms as progressive. This is the moment the royal succession plan ceased to be a future possibility and became an immediate, desperate necessity. The leak suggests that the condition affecting the Princess of Wales is far more complex than the palace's communication team ever dared to admit. It isn't just a matter of physical stamina anymore. The reports hint at a neurological decline, momentary confusion, disorientation, and memory lapses that have turned the future queen's life into a private battleground. These aren't just whispers from the internet. These are observed patterns, documented in top-tier facilities across Europe. For the first time, the shrill truth forces us to confront a monarchy where Catherine may never return to the full extent of her royal duties. The suggested care plan is brutal in its finality: 12 to 18 months of full-time monitoring, a total removal from public pressure, and a sanctuary free from the cold machinery of the crown. This isn't a temporary break, it is a point of no return. The palace's frantic scramble to contain this leak only confirmed its authenticity. They didn't deny it, they simply stayed silent, a silence that felt like the air being sucked out of a room. The institutional panic is palpable, as the Grey Men realize that their most effective bridge to the modern world is currently being dismantled by an illness that doesn't care about royal protocol. Then came the image that confirmed what words could not. A photograph that has since become the haunting symbol of this era. Prince William was spotted entering a private neurological clinic just outside London. There was no entourage, no royal motorcade, no polished facade of strength. It was just a husband, looking pale and hollow-eyed, walking toward a building that holds the secrets of his wife's failing health. His face, captured discreetly by a member of the public, carried the weight of a broken future. It wasn't the face of an heir to the throne. It was the face of a man who has finally realized that the crown he will one day wear is going to be far heavier and lonelier than he ever imagined. This image stripped away the last of the palace's spin and replaced it with a raw, undeniable grief. In the wake of this revelation, the discussion behind palace walls has shifted from recovery to sanctuary. There are now confirmed reports of plans to relocate the family entirely, moving them from the fishbowl of Kensington Palace to a rural estate where the cameras cannot reach. The goal is no longer about maintaining an image, it is about survival. William is reportedly leading this charge, demanding a place where Catherine can breathe without expectation, and where their children can adjust to a reality that no longer includes the rehearsed illusions of royal life. The shrill truth is that the monarchy is retreating. The final succession plan is being built on the ashes of a dream. And as the palace prepares for a future without its brightest star, the world is left to watch the slow, painful unraveling of a dynasty that tried too hard to stay perfect in an imperfect world. In a room where no cameras were allowed, where the press could not penetrate, and where the Grey Men had no seat at the table, a moment occurred that has redefined the very soul of the British monarchy. This is the heart of the shrill truth that King Charles has finally chosen to unveil. He did not visit Catherine as a sovereign checking on a subordinate. He came as a father-in-law, a man haunted by his own failures, seeking to make a promise that the institution had never before been capable of making. The visit was unannounced, unscheduled, and entirely off the royal record. Charles reportedly arrived at the private recovery estate unaccompanied, slipping through the back entrance to avoid the spectacle his own palace had created. For a man whose entire life has been a series of choreographed movements, this was his most radical act of rebellion. The meeting lasted nearly an hour, a stretch of time that insiders describe as a sanctuary of silence. There were no aides to take notes, no protection officers to guard the door from within. Just the monarch and his daughter-in-law sitting face to face. The shrill truth of that encounter is that Charles didn't come with a strategy or a speech. He came with an apology. Witnesses who saw the king exit the room described him as a man who had been hollowed out by grief, his eyes bloodshot and his face solemn. But there was a new, dangerous resolve in his step. He had looked at the woman who had been the stabilizing force of his family and realized that she had been bearing the weight of the crown on a broken heart. The words that emerged from that room, whispered softly to Catherine, and later leaked by a source close to the king's private circle, are perhaps the most significant vow in modern royal history. Charles reportedly leaned in, clasped her hand, and said, "You will always be our queen, whether on the throne or not." This was not just a comforting sentiment, it was a constitutional earthquake. With those few words, Charles effectively dismantled the palace's replacement strategy. He was telling Catherine that her value was not tied to her utility to the firm, nor her presence at garden parties or state banquets. He was promising that the institution would no longer erase the human being to save the symbol. He was vowing that her legacy was safe, regardless of what the clinical reports said about her future duties. When Catherine heard those words, the stoic mask she had maintained for months finally collapsed. She broke down, not in fear, but in the overwhelming relief of finally being seen. For the first time since her diagnosis, the cold machinery of the monarchy had paused to offer compassion instead of a schedule. Charles reportedly wept with her, not as a king, but as a grandfather, and a man who had seen too much pain go unspoken in the name of duty. This shared silence, this vow in the shadows, is what ultimately unified the fractured royal family. It sent a message louder than any protocol could, that within the halls of the monarchy, humanity had finally survived. But as the king stepped back into the world, he knew that this promise came with a price. He had chosen Catherine over the institution, and in doing so, he had set the stage for the most controversial final act of his reign. The curtain is finally falling on the old era of royal secrecy, but the shrill truth has only just begun to reshape the world as we know it. King Charles's decision to break his silence wasn't just a tactical move to manage a crisis. It was a calculated sacrifice of the monarchy's greatest weapon, its mystery, in order to save its soul. As the final notes of his statement echo through the halls of Westminster and into the homes of millions, one thing is abundantly clear. The British monarchy will never be the same again. The final succession plan he has unveiled isn't a document of power, but a manifesto of humanity. It is the birth of a new era, where the cold machinery of the palace has been forced to yield to the warmth of the human heart. The shrill truth of this new era is that Prince William is no longer just the heir to the throne. He is the guardian of a new kind of sovereignty. By standing his ground, by defying the Grey Men, and by prioritizing Catherine's sanctuary over royal protocol, William has effectively reset the monarchy. He has proven that a modern king can be both a disciplined leader and a devoted husband. The future of the crown now rests on a foundation of transparency that was unthinkable just a year ago. The succession plan now accounts for the vulnerability of the people within it, ensuring that no future queen and no future child like George, Charlotte, or Louis will ever have to suffer in the same suffocating silence that once claimed Diana and nearly broke Catherine. And what of Catherine, the woman at the center of this global storm? The shrill truth is that she has become the most powerful figure in the history of the modern monarchy, not because of her title, but because of her resilience. Her illness, as devastating as it remains, has done something that 70 years of tradition could not. It has humanized the crown. She is no longer just a polished icon on a balcony. She is a symbol of every family's battle with health, fear, and the search for sanctuary. Whether she ever returns to the full extent of her public duties or remains in the quiet sanctuary William has built for her, she has already fulfilled her greatest role. She has saved the monarchy from its own coldness. She is, as Charles vowed, the queen of our hearts, whether she ever wears the physical crown or not. As we close this chapter, the shrill truth leaves us with a haunting question. Was the price of this honesty worth it? The palace is fractured, the old guard is in retreat, and the future remains uncertain. But in that uncertainty, there is finally room for sunlight. King Charles, in his final act of rebellion, has given his family the one thing the institution always denied them: the right to be human. The monarchy has been backed into a corner, and it has chosen to come out fighting with the truth. As the world continues to watch with held breath, we are reminded that even the oldest institutions must eventually choose between the shadow of the past and the light of the future. The crown has chosen the light, and though the path ahead is filled with shadows, it is at least a path walked in truth. The mask has dropped, and the throne is finally exposed. But as the king and the future king unite to protect the woman they love, do you believe the monarchy has truly changed? Or is this just another layer of royal strategy? The shrill truth is now in your hands. What do you think of Charles's final vow to Catherine? Let us know in the comments below. Your voice is part of this history now. Before you go, if this deep dive into the heart of the royal crisis moved you, please make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We are here to bring you the stories the palace tried to hide, and we couldn't do it without your support. Stay tuned for our next analysis, where we go even deeper into the secrets behind the rural estate, where Catherine is seeking her final sanctuary. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next chapter.